Okay. I'm Jenna Silverstein,
I'm Danielle Tack.
and today we're gonna be talking about the podcast that we just watched with Rolf Fletcher on mentor texts. And we're gonna start with the question: how are the ideas and information presented connected to what you already know? So I guess I kind of were saying how we feel like it's connected to language. He was talking a lot about language and how it's really important for a student to and other students to learn from the language and really understand how to write. You learn how to write through reading, and I think that's really important. And if you're reading something, that'll help you understand language more, and that's really how you develop language.
Yeah, and he also talked about how you can use a mentor text, what is written to help your own writing. So kind of like we were talking about, like if you use it in like a lesson, you can use it in the mini lesson, like pick out something that they're doing and then have the kids work on that.
And also, like, I feel like it's really important for kids to actually, like, see it. Like, we've talked about in class how I feel like we were just reading the text, like, out loud and, like, but then once we had to go and find our own mentor text, I feel like that was really important. And it's just, like, seeing it on paper and seeing, like, kids also, many different people as well, just, like, decide like they find many different things in a text, not just like what you're hoping for the student to see, but like they come up with their own thing as well. um okay.
The next question that we're going to be talking about is, what new ideas did you get that extended or pushed your thinking in new directions? And I actually think what Jenna was just talking about how kids can come up with their own kind of interpretations and things that they find in the text, was something that I hadn't really thought about. Because, I think we all, sometimes as teachers, think that, oh, we have to teach this, and so kids will get this because we don't think that they will be able to pick up stuff on their own, and so we feel like we have to give them like a lot of like guidance and scaffolding. But I think the idea that they can do that themselves is important, because I also think sometimes we underestimate kids, and so giving them that kind of freedom and allowing them to do it themselves, I think will help them a lot to
Yeah,
learn.
I definitely agree with that. The more text that you give them, the more they're likely to learn from it. And specifically, Ralph Fletcher talked about Stephen King's book on writing, and I read that in a previous class, and it's really about how it is a mentor text. It's talking about like how to write, pretty much. And I feel like there's really no system of writing. I mean, yeah, you have the whole writing process that we've talked about in class, but I think it's just about like the question says, just like you're discovering new ideas and you're learning from other people. And I think that's really what writing is about. Like you're just kind of connecting your own ideas and growing upon those new ideas.
Yeah, and I also think it was interesting what he said about short stories too, about
Mm-hmm.
how we don't really do much with short stories, because I think that's really true. We always tend to do a lot with picture books and chapter books, but I thought that was an interesting point that you made about short stories.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent. Like, I think with short stories, I feel like I read a lot of short stories in high school, more so than when I was in younger grades, I just feel like it's hard to pick short stories because you don't know what's really appropriate and what's not in that short amount of time. And I don't know if time is the right word, but like that, like you don't. There's so many short stories out there that it's hard to pick like the age group that it like can correspond with. With that being said, my fourth grade class that I've been in all year so far, they kind of read a lot of short stories, but I feel like there's a way to do it and there's a way to teach them. So it was kind of cool to see that they're learning more from short stories. Um, our our next question is, what is challenging or confusing for you to get your mind around? What questions, wonderings, or puzzles do you now have? I think one thing that's kind of confusing is how to go about. I mean, we did pick mentor texts, but like I still feel like I'm not quite sure how to go about like choosing the different texts, because I feel like kids, he talked about in the interview, Fletcher talked about how kids learn from many different texts. So it's like you want a child to learn this skill, and maybe one child does, but then with the text that you picked, but then another child doesn't. So how do you go about doing that? You know what I mean? Like how do
Yeah.
how do you pick a text that everyone can relate to, because it really, maybe a child doesn't relate to it, but you
Yeah.
feel like they should.
Yeah. And I think that too, for me at least, I agree with what she said, and I also think that like picking a text and like wanting kids to get get out of it what you want them to get out of it could also be challenging, because like if they think of they find their own things in the text, like what do you do with them? Like if you're focused on I don't know, like descriptive writing with like verbs, like how we did in class, and then the kids are like using the mentor text and they don't pick up on that, but they pick up on like something else. Like what do you do then? Like do you change your lesson like to go along with what they said, or do you go back to it another day? Like that's what I'm kind of struggling to see there.
Yeah, because if kids don't, because they're not all gonna like see the same thing.
Right.
And if they don't, then like, how do you go about, like you said, like teaching them? Like you're not teaching in a way you're supposed to be teaching to the individual student, but you're not. You're teaching to 30 plus
Right.
kids.
Right.
And it's like, how do you go about teaching, especially writing,
Yeah.
to students that are at all different levels? How do you go about having like controlling like their interest as well? Because I think writing needs to be interesting, and that's a problem that I have seen. Like it's like okay, like one of my mentor teachers just like tells her students like, okay, this is what you're writing about today. Get your writing journals out. You have 20 minutes and you have to write about this subject. And I don't think that's the way to teach writing. I think you need to, because the students don't like it, and they hate writing. And yeah, maybe some like it, but the way that she's doing it, I feel like is making them not like writing. And I just kind of feel it's challenging with having those students liking writing and stuff. The next question, last question. What texts have been mentor texts for you? I guess I'll start with this and maybe you'll build off of it.
Yeah, I'll think about it.
I actually brought a mentor text to class this past week. That was a mentor text to me. It was one of the first novels I was ever introduced to in first grade. Because I would read picture books and stuff like that. But this was like one of my earliest memories with like my first novel reading as a class. It's Charlotte's Web, and I feel like that book really inspired me to be a better reader. And it's not necessarily on writing though. I didn't really think about it from like a writer's perspective until till recently. But it does have a lot of good qualities in the text. And I think it's hard to think of, because when I look at mentor text, like I've never really thought about how writing, like I obviously reading inspires writing, but I never really thought about a text that specifically inspired me to write. Like yeah, I like to write, but I think it's more I write more based on like opinions and based on discussions that I have with people rather than with a mentor text. And I think that's what I've seen in the classroom as well. So, what's been a mentor text to me is just something that's really captured my attention and really like more of like that can lead into discussions. So Charlotte's Web was one because it was interesting to see. From what I remember, like Fern's point of view and like just capturing a different point of view rather than like in a picture book. I think chapter books for me are better mentor texts personally for me because they have more to say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would probably say the Harry Potter series was probably the biggest one because I really like the story, but I liked also like the genre of it, how it was fantasy and how, she kind of like made up like words to go like with the whole wizarding world and like when I realized when I tend to write and even back then I tended to write like that. Like I sometimes would make up my own words or I would kind of write in that same kind of genre. And so I think that was a pretty big inspiration. And then there's also been a bunch of picture books that have also been mentor text to me too. There's one about field. It was called Field Day, and it was about these kids and like the they were in their fifth grade and they were having like an end of the school year party. And I remember after I read that, I tended to write more about what happened in school. After that, like started to get more into like school rather than stuff that was happening outside of school. And so I'm sure there's more I can't think about, but I think like it's also like in the moment. Like when I was growing up, like I'd read a book and then like I'd get inspired by it, so I'd try to like copy it or like pick up on the
Yeah.
techniques in my own writing. So I don't know, I can't remember them all, but I'm sure there was more that were
One book, actually,
inspirational.
series that now that I'm thinking about it, did inspire my writing. It was called Junie B. Jones. I'm sure
Oh yeah, I
everybody's
read that too.
read those books.
Yeah.
It just inspired my writing because she didn't. My mom was concerned with me reading them too because she didn't spell everything correctly, and she didn't want me to think that that's how it's spelled, and that she wanted me to like read stories that were accurate in spelling. And one thing, and I think that was very much with that thinking. I see where she was thinking about it, but that's what got me to read. Being able to relate, to have someone relate to me with, I'm struggling, I'm learning how to read, I'm learning how to write, I'm not going to write everything correctly, I'm not going to read everything correctly, and I think that just coming down to like my level as a first or second grader and being able, someone that wrote that and being able to relate to me was really important, and that is what really shaped my writing and reading. That's about it.